Tom woke up in a hospital. He'd seen enough hospital rooms to know exactly where he was. He noticed his awkward body position before acknowledging the bars onto the sides of his head. He reached up and ran his fingers along them. It was some sort of neck brace that was screwed into his skull. He looked out the window and saw a concrete slab. Slowly his body began to throb in pain. Time passed. "You're awake," a cheery voice sounded as a nurse walked in, cracked out on somebody's meds. "What hospital is this?" Tom felt himself mumbling out of the corner of his mouth. She reached out and dabbed a jewel off the side of his mouth. "Ford Wagon General." "Tom, I'm going to need to ask you something before I give you another shot for the pain. Do you understand well enough today?" "Think so," Tom muttered. "We don't have any information concerning your relatives, and it looks like we have your date of birth wrong." "September 1979, Tom responded quickly. "And that would make you how old?" the nurse said, widening her eyes and leaning over him. 32. "Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?" The nurse looked at his chart. "According to this, you were born in the year 1939. "What are you talking about? I'm 32 years old." Wordlessly, the nurse exited the room and returned with a mirror. He reached out and took it. He looked 50 years older. His face was full of wrinkles, his eyes and mouth were slits, most of his hair had gone white, and screws were driven into his forehead to hold the brace in line. "What happened to me?" Tom looked up at the nurse as she held up the dripping syringe. "Time for your medication, Mr. Nealin." "Wait, I'm not Nealin." Tom began to howl, but she'd already stuck him with the needle and was pumping him full of meds. Over the next few weeks, Tom slept most of the time. He would wake up to the pain, and soon a nurse would appear and put him back to sleep. One day he woke early and waited for some time before turning on the television for the first time since. A courtroom show was on. He looked at it for a while, disinterested and uncomfortable, wondering when they were going to arrive with his medication. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something wheel past the door. It looked like a rolling surgery tray. Tom hadn't tried to stand since he could remember, and wondered how he'd do. Slowly he sat up all the way and fumbled with the bed rail before getting his feet on the floor. He looked out into the hallway again and saw a lone wheelchair roll past next. It struck him as slightly funny. "What's going on out there?" he called. It was probably a few friends from Ren Ambulance who heard where he was and were playing a joke on him. Tom smiled as he shuffled to the door. When he moved to the hall, he found it totally empty. To the left, where everything had rolled, was just the end of the hall. It had one door with an exit to stairs sign. It crossed his mind that he had imagined a rolling chair and surgery tray. Then he figured it out. "I'm doing just what the bastards want. They want me out of bed and I'm walking around and I'm doing it." Tom began to smile again. His friends were probably standing outside that exit door with a rolling tray and a wheelchair beside them, ready to laugh their asses off. He walked to the door and pushed it open to see an empty landing. Wind gushed past. "Excuse me." Tom heard a shaky voice behind him that gave him a scare. He turned and saw a little old lady creeping past with a cane. He began to smile until she looked up with demonic eyes. Instantly a bony hand clenched his arm. He didn't need to look to know who was behind him. Lester Nealin grabbed him by his neck brace and tossed him down the steps. The next thing he sensed was the music. Ballroom music. Tom opened his eyes and saw the record spinning on the old antique player. He stared at the gold, horn-styled speaker. He saw that he was sitting in a wheelchair and a blanket covered his lap. Old people surrounded him. Some sat while others danced to the music. Some of the ladies even wore evening gowns, and some of the men tuxes. They seemed to twitch and move at obscene time variations, their faces slightly warped. He knew where he was. The dark panels, thick red curtains, the worn furniture scattered around and beneath the high and ancient chandelier. He was back at 11 Liberty Street. Suddenly a cheer rose up as a young Lester Nealin cruised through the front door wearing a new suit and hat. A few men gathered around him, smiling and shaking his hand as Lester grinned like a politician, his shiny black hair slicked back. "Wait till you get a load of this." Lester announced with an insane glint in his eyes. The two old ladies who answered the door before walked up giving him kisses. He held up a large paper bag, overflowing with prescription meds, to each of the women. Then he gestured to the chest on the floor. Everyone circled around as he opened it. "Everything I've ever stolen through all my tours through all the different nursing homes and hospitals." Inside it glittered with trinkets, watches, rings, necklaces, and pins. Everyone cheered, and through the midst, Tom caught Lester's eyes. "It could get pretty rough, kid," Lester said, breaking away from the group. "Boy, do I know it there," he said, walking up to Tom as the group formed around him again. Tom tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lester playfully skipped for a moment, receiving more laughter from his people as he led them away. Lester did look great, 50 years younger. Tom glanced around at the few who remained seated around him, speechless, immobile, the vegetables from before. When Tom looked at the old black man, their eyes met. They stared at each other for a while before the old man started to grin. He began to wheeze with laughter. Suddenly the smile ran cold from his face as he nodded to the other solemn candidates. Blood filled their eyes as if red wine was being poured into a bowl. The plants suddenly moved, all in sync with one another, as they pulled out hatchets and began to chop their own legs off. A wagon is wheeled past, with bars and hollow faces peering out